guys, welcome to my how-to series. If you're new to the channel, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share the channel with your friends and family, and leave any comments down below of any movements you'd want me to cover in the future. Before we start, just like to say I'm not a personal trainer, I'm not a CrossFit coach. This series is just purely me giving you guys tips and ideas of how I learned how to do these movements. I had nobody teach me to do these movements. I don't have a coach. I taught myself how to do most of these things throughout the lockdown period. So if you believe that you have to be doing CrossFit for 10 years or I don't know how long before you can start doing these movements, or you have to have a dedicated programming and coach to help you through this, it's not true. I taught myself how to do these things purely from YouTube tutorials, and then there's no shortcut. You have to get out there and do the movements. So the first move I'm going to be covering is the ring muscle up. I know it's one of the more advanced ones, and you know, it's sort of a progression to build up to that. So you want to first be able to do pull-ups, then sort of advance to bar muscle ups, and then eventually get to ring muscle ups. But this is the first one I'm covering just because I think there are a lot of people out there wondering, like, it's this massive task. How do you get it? How do you approach doing this? So this is the first one I want to cover. I'll cover pull-ups and bar muscle-ups in future videos as well, so stick around for those. But yeah, let's get straight into it. So the first thing I want to cover are those sort of requirements or strength standards you want to have before getting into this. And this isn't because this is the only time you're going to be able to get this movement. This is just purely, you don't want to injure yourself. You want to sort of have the strength and capacity to do these movements safely. So sort of just as a guideline, purely as a guideline, I think if you're able to do 10 strict pull-ups and you sort of got the kipping motion and you're able to do at least 1 or 2 bar muscle ups, I think you should be fine to go into the ring muscle up. Once again, these are just standard, these are just sort of a guideline. If you want to attempt these beforehand or afterhand, just make sure you're doing it safely and you have someone around who can maybe help you if you don't have that baseline strength yet. So the first thing I want to talk about when getting onto the rings, obviously the rings are awkward piece of equipment. Not a lot of us get exposure to that throughout our fitness or CrossFit journeys. I find people also find it intimidating to hang from the rings and then try and get yourself over them, so they just rather avoid them. So I think getting comfortable with the rings is the first thing, and that includes doing as many ring rows, ring dips, ring push-ups, everything on the rings as much as possible, just getting used to that movement. Obviously it requires a lot of shoulder stability because they obviously move around and they're not stable like the bar, so that's obviously something you want to get used to. The first thing we want to focus on when doing the ring muscle up is your grip. So when grabbing the rings, you don't want to just grab onto it like this. It'll make it a lot more difficult for yourself to get over the rings. You want to sort of have your wrist at the top, so when you pull yourself over to the rings, it's easier to get your elbows across. So how you do this is, if this is the ring, you want to chop through and then grab to the left. You'll see your knuckle at the top here is pointing up, pointing to the top, not like this, straight through and then grab, and then you'll see it sort of rests on your wrist here, and you'll feel it's very uncomfortable at the start, very difficult, but as you get used to the movement, this is sort of second nature for me now. So just quickly, when you grab onto the rings, it'll look like this. So you can see your wrists are at the top of the rings, they're not hanging down below here. This just makes it easier to sort of get your elbows over the rings when you're pulling yourself over. So yeah, this is what the grip's supposed to look like, and then obviously once you hang, you want to be hanging like this. So yeah, at the start this is going to be very uncomfortable. It's going to be hurting your wrist here at the bottom, but like I mentioned, just keep practicing, get used to that movement. So just grab onto the rings, or even if you have 2 loose rings like this, just grab onto it, just get used to that grip. It'll make this movement a lot easier for you. Okay, great. Once you're comfortable with your grip, the next part we move on to is the kip and the swing. So in CrossFit we don't do a strict ring muscle up, we do kipping ring muscle ups. So that's going to be the focus of this video. And the kip is a bit different than the kip on the bar, just because the rings are moving around and they're not as stable as the bar. So on a bar muscle up or a bar pull up or anything with the bar, the kip is you focus on bringing your chest through and then pushing your chest backwards, so you get that nice hollow position throughout the kip. With the ring muscle up, the principle remains the same. It's how you initiate and how you keep that kip going that's a bit different. So what helped me a lot is when I'm hanging dead from the rings, I focus on my toes. So rather than focusing on pulling my chest through and back, I focus on bringing my toes up to where I can see them and then pulling my toes back as far as I can to get that nice big kip. And yeah, so you're still pulling your chest through and back, but rather than trying to move the rings around with your hands, it's a bit easier if you focus on bringing your toes up as far as possible and then swinging them back as far as possible and then getting that kipping swing, that kipping motion as comfortable as possible. Okay, awesome. So once you're comfortable with the kip, you can do, say, let's say 3 sets of 10 kips without losing your momentum or that rhythm. The next part of the movement is pulling yourself to the rings. And it's a bit different than for the ring muscle, for the bar muscle up, in that you're not necessarily pulling up, but it's more of a rowing motion. So once you've kipped, you've gone through and your feet are at the top, your body almost becomes, not 100%, but it almost becomes parallel, or perpendicular to the rings. And then from there, it's sort of a pulling motion. So you're pulling the rings as close to your chest as possible. Instead of pulling your shoulders down, you're pulling your chest as close as possible to the rings. And that's the pulling portion of that. And once you what helped me was change that mindset of I have to pull myself up as in a pull-up, and more rowing motion and pulling my chest to the rings. That made a big difference for me. And then the next part is getting yourself over the rings. And this is the part most people struggle with, just because you have to be as aggressive as possible. And when you're not comfortable on the rings yet, it's difficult to get that aggressive push through the rings. So once you've pulled yourself up to here, you want to throw your head through and your chest through as fast as possible. And then once you've got the rings to your chest, you're sort of pulling them across your chest and then pulling over. And then once you're up from here, you can just dip through. So you're pulling the rings as close to your chest as possible and then sort of drawing a line at the bottom of your pecs as you bust your head through and then get yourself over the ring. So you're rowing and then throwing your chest through. Now this is quite a difficult motion for people who aren't used to it. So I'll show you a few drills that help me get used to that motion, and then once you're comfortable with these drills, you can sort of move on to the rings and start getting your first ring muscle ups. Okay, cool. So the first drill that helped me get used to that motion of getting your chest and your head over the rings was the assisted ring muscle up. So what you want to do is you get your nice hook grip, so punch through, grab the ring, so you've now got that nice hook grip, and then keeping your feet on the ground, you pull up to your chest, and then get used to getting your head through. So you can do it slowly, pull up, and then get through, and then once you get a bit more used to that, you can start speeding it up, pull up, and then punch through. So what you want to focus on is punching your head through as aggressively as possible. So you don't want to have a nice good kip, nice pull, and then you're slow to bring your shoulders around. So what helped me is punching my head through as aggressively as possible. So if you take a look at that again, punching your head and chest through as aggressively as possible. One thing, especially with the ring muscle ups, you want to keep the rings as close to your chest as possible. You don't want them flaring out. That's when you're going to get shoulder injuries. So while you're practicing this, when you come around, make sure your rings aren't flaring out to the side, but you're keeping them nice and close to your chest, tucked in. Yeah, what also helps with keeping the rings nice and close is just your normal ring dips. So when doing your dips, focus on keeping the rings as close to your body as possible and not flaring them out. You want to keep everything nice and tight. So if we jump up and you go down, back up, you don't want to be pushing out like that. That's where you're going to lead to some injuries and potentially hurting your shoulders. So one of the most important things with the ring muscle up is when you get that kip and your toes are nice and high, you want to, as you pull, you want to thrust your hips as high as possible. The higher you get your hips, the less of a pull it is and the easier it is to turn yourself over. So when you're kipping and you've got that nice rhythm and you've got your toes nice and high, as you pull, think of thrusting your hips up to get to that nice parallel to the floor position so that it's easier to pull yourself in and then turn around. So Very, very important to think about your hips keeping up and thrusting them as high as possible. It will also make your turnaround a lot easier. So once you've got your kips nice and steady, you've got them good rhythm, you've gotten used to this motion of aggressively punching through your head and then catching with the rings nice and tight to your chest, and you've got at least, let's say, 10 ring dips just to be able to push yourself to that extended position. Then you can start getting into that full ring muscle up. The biggest thing with this is confidence. So you want to build that confidence through a good kip swing, being comfortable with this position, and then when you get out there and you start doing your actual ring muscle ups, it's just confidence and trusting in this process. At first it's going to feel a bit awkward, but as soon as you're used to the rings, you're used to the grip, aggressively punching your head through, these should come easy for you. So let's go outside and do a few actual ring muscle ups. So take note of how I drive my hips up as high as possible in this muscle up. So you get that nice big kip, get your toes as high as possible, and then aggressively drive your hips up and push your head through as quick as possible. Awesome guys, thanks so much for watching. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment down below any other movements you'd want me to run through. And then I really hope this has helped you, even if you've only picked up 1 or 2 tricks that helps you get that first ring muscle up. Please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear you guys' stories. And like I mentioned at the start, I know it feels like a mammoth task, especially getting on the rings. I know for me it felt like this impossible task to get to. But as I said at the start, if you're consistent, you put in the time and the effort, I promise you'll get there. This isn't something that's just left for the top athletes. Anyone can do this. So please guys, be safe, build that baseline strength, and then follow these tips and tricks. And then please let me know when you hit that first ring muscle up. It is possible. And then yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.